refer to the concepts that are presented here. This isn't just for today, but it's really the whole time. And as you have more time to read the guide and to think about some ideas, we'll try to remind you about things we talked about earlier, because it's all kind of fits together in a pattern. They're all sort of interrelated. Perhaps it is best to look at the illustrations and just point a couple of them out. The page numbers are not numbered, but the figures are numbered at the end of the article sequentially. And if you can find a page,
it's the first set of figures. It says rollover in big letters on the far upper right.
The basin and range is a period of time that extends from about 30 million years ago, actually to now, or 5 million years ago, depending on how picky you are. It's a time in the western United States when there was major regional pull-apart, regional extension. And the result is that the crust developed a whole series of complex mineral faults. The concept of stretching the crust and breaking it seems pretty simple. But the first 3 or 4 figures were designed really to give you some idea both of the terminology and also the complexity that you can develop simply when you stretch the crust apart. The first figure, for example, uses terms like detachment, which are near horizontal breaks, above which you can see the crust has been broken into a series of slivers, the result of extension of the crust. And these individual diagrams describe the faults, the place or the face from which all the blocks slide laterally away, the breakaway. A listric fault, which may or may not be a familiar term, but where the fault flattens at depth onto a basal near flat detachment, and some other kinds of faults that develop as part of the system. Notice basically when you have a series of pull-aparts, you develop kind of an anticline of having broken. That's a rollover structure. And you may have noticed coming in from Pahrump that many of the units are dipping east here. These units over here are dipping east. You can tell which way the faults are generally because the units, the layers, dip into the breakaway. So here they're dipping kind of eastward. This diagram gives you some of the terminology, the basal detachment, and all the intense breakup that develops as the crust extends 100%, 150%, maybe even more. Again, the basin range is an extensional time, and so you're getting these kinds of pull-apart structures. The bottom diagram, figure 4, is interesting because this mess that has developed is really the result of the ongoing stretching and breaking and continued stretching and breaking. Notice some basins, like the basins out in front of you, all of which have beneath them a very complex series of faults, but notice there are several sets of faults. Some fairly steep ones, labeled there as younger, and some very gently dipping ones, which are the ones I labeled just a couple, which are older. As you pull apart the crust, blocks rotate and slide downward until they're practically horizontal. And because gravity operates as part of the system during the time it's stretching, those faults that are near horizontal don't move very well anymore, and new ones break. So you have really a rather simple concept that earlier faults become oriented poorly for more slip, and so new, more nearly steep faults develop that simply cut the old faults without any regard of those. Again, you can see that all this complex faults, breaking faults, die out at some detachment depth. And I might also add, basins commonly develop at those places where there's a downdrop of the younger, here labeled younger faults, which are the steeper ones. You get some idea of some pretty complex geology, because remember the stretching has continued over tens of millions of years. And so earlier faults slide and they get broken by newer ones, which are steeper ones.
The thing is, later on we'll talk about this area. There's that faulting has basically chopped up a zone of, that is all was a collisional or convergent plate boundary, right? Earlier, and then before that it was extensional, right? So you had extension, basin fill, collision, and then extension again. So it's pretty well sliced and diced.
Yeah,
It's
that's
extremely
true. I was trying to
complex.
focus on just the youngest sequence from 30 million years on till now. But yes, there's a whole earlier compressional history. Figure 6 is a figure which shows basically the western United States and the extent of the basin and range, which are the structures, largely, for example, Nevada, that have these things look like combs. Those are the normal faults. The combs, the teeth on the combs, if you want to use that analogy, are the downdrop sides. The basin and range lies between the Colorado Plateau and the Sierra. And it's about 1,000 kilometers wide to the north, which actually extends to Montana. And it narrows southward into southern California and actually goes down into Mexico.
Yeah, nobody here would have been on the trip to Mexico, but we saw the same.
Exactly.
Looks just like this in
Right here is part of the normal fault structure in northern Mexico. I will point out, and I'll say this in a second, if you look at sort of southeastern California, you see a series of arrows on faults that show left or right motion. Those are basically strike slip faults. By that we simply mean basically horizontal sliding rather than up and down. Normal faults drop things up and down, or obliquely up and down, but mostly up and down. Strike slip faults move things horizontally. So on this particular map, this figure 6, many of the ones that have arrows are actually strike slip faults. And you can see we're in a zone over here someplace where you have both strike slip and normal faults.
And strike slip, you guys probably, the San Andreas fault is one of the classic.
Horizontal motion
Yeah.
faults.
Associated with transform plate boundaries.
Yep.
What is the CO Corp?
What is the what?
The CoCorp. Remember we did
CoCorp.
CoCorp in this seismic stratigraphy, where it's the big landline seismic. They're looking at deep crustal structure.
So they ran a line through there.
Yeah,
Along
yeah.
that.
So it's somewhat you can see there's a number of those throughout.
CoCorp.
Yeah,
Deep crustal and
they use the
upper mantle
fiber
structure.
size trucks
Yes.
that we saw. Yeah.
You'll notice in the bottom diagram that the basin and range is characterized by having a very shallow depth to the hot, or the warm anyway, asthenosphere, with the crust on the Colorado Plateau and the crust over there in the Sierra Nevada being much deeper. So it's a zone of high heat flow, as well as high topography and extension, but the depth to the asthenosphere, the upper mantle below the crust, is relatively shallow here. And part of that heat flux has melted some of the material in the lower crust and the upper mantle and gives you a range of bimodal basalt and rhyolitic volcanism in the basin and range.
But you were just standing.
Exactly. This looked to me like lava.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm not gonna. I know it's cold, and I'm sympathetic. It's actually not very nice here with you guys as a break. Here's another diagram that shows the basin and range and the strike slip faults, the Sierra Nevada and the Colorado Plateau, and the basin and range we're dealing with here in Southern California is right there in the zone between the two. Okay, I'll practice this to see if I can do it right. If I can get you to hold your hands like this, one palm facing this way and one palm facing that way. So you can clap your palms together. Okay, and then if you slide them apart, you wind up with a space. Between your finger, where your fingers hit your wrist, you have basically this kind of, now we'll do it, horizontal motion, but the space between the palms of your hands open. Okay, you're looking at the opening zone. The portion that opens is the extensional basin. That's this diagram.
A wrench base.
The fault at the bottom here is one of those strike slip faults. There's another one on the other side here, and there's a whole number of them. But this diagram, what is it? Reading upside down is not what that. Oh, 11. Yeah. Here is one of these pull-apart basins with the sheep. Is it Sheep Mountain or Sheep Mountain? I think it is fault, and the Furnace Creek fault being the ones that are right lateral, right lateral, right lateral. Open up the space. Here's the space, and I'm sure Dr. Anderson will want to talk more about using this localized basin as a pull-apart structure, as a depot site for funneling in sediments and for volcanic activity and so on.
For those of you in stratigraphy, again, the ridge basin, right? That was a whole series of these faults that opened up a whole series of basins.
This
and
silly
just kept
thing.
dumping, just kept dumping sediments.
Strike
in there.
slips and
So
opening
Well, and if we
space.
come back when the lights are on, you'll see the alluvial. I mentioned before, but those are the textbook. Every textbook on alluvial fans always has a picture of the Pennant Range. And these
Yeah.
beautiful alluvial
Beautiful
fans.
alluvial fans.
But that sediment's just rolling off these high mountains, basically, and filling the basin. It's got nowhere else to go, so it's going to keep filling it up with time.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting annotations here which you can read when you're a little more comfortable about the faces you'd expect being funneled into this low area from all sides and some of the structures. There's one or two more things, and then we can pick this up a bit later. Any time during the trip where there are things here that sort of click or you're not sure about, pull me aside and I'll be glad to chat with you. This is from the guidebook. Did everybody read the guidebook, or the one that was National Park from Toxlin Wright? Was that something everybody was assigned to read? Or?
Everyone.
We have a couple copies as well, if you didn't, which is someone wrote up a very nice overview of the geology of the whole park.
Yeah, Toxlin and Lauren Wright.
We posted it on Blackboard and some of the others, but I have 5 or 6 copies that we can read in camp if you want to read. It's a very nice overview. It's pretty short.
Okay, if you got this one, this is figure 12, and this is really worth the study too. We're in the Armagosa Range, which is this thing here, which tapers in that direction to the north. I think we're in this part of it right in here. Behind us this way is a right lateral Furnace Creek fault. That's behind us. Right in here where it's right in here somewhere. And the fault at the base is at the base of it's the Black Mountain Range. That fault zone, Black Mountain Fault Zone, which is just at the base now. It goes up. So I think we're in this kind of triangular
Yeah,
peak
the
area.
footwall of a normal.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.